The door swung open with a gust of rain, and Wealth stepped into a place built for people who counted their dollars twice. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to lean in behind him, lighting up the small diner with a flash of white. Lina froze mid-wipe of a table. Her cloth paused above the surface. The man who entered wore a suit worth more than a month of tips, but the wet edges of it told a different story. He'd been caught unguarded, vulnerable human. She had seen businessmen before, but not one who looked like he'd been stripped of all the armor money could buy. Richard Hale blinked against the dim yellow lights. The diner smelled faintly of fried onions and strong coffee, ordinary scents, but strangely comforting in a way he hadn't felt in years. The storm had shut down the roads. His driver had taken shelter elsewhere. For once, Richard Hale, billionaire CEO of Hale Industries, had no choice but to sit among vinyl seats and chipped counters. Lina approached with steady steps. She didn't know his name yet, but everything about him carried the chill of someone who lived above the world, not inside it. "You can sit anywhere," she said. "Storm's not letting anyone leave." He nodded, water running down his collar. When he sat, Lina set a coffee cup in front of him, a cup with a thin crack curling along one side, like a scar that refused to fade. Most customers complained about it. Tonight, she didn't bother switching it out. Something about him made the cracked cup feel right. He lifted it slowly, noticing the floor. "Rough night?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "For you or the cup?" He didn't answer right away. Their conversation began as small talk, the kind that fills silence but never touches truth. Yet something about the storm, the heavy drumming on the windows, the sense of being cut off from the world pressed them closer to honesty. "So," she asked, "you traveling for work?" He looked at the cup instead of her. Always. The word carried a weight she recognized. Work that swallowed a life whole. Work that left rooms filled but souls empty. Lina had grown up watching her mother hold 3 jobs just to stay steady. She knew what exhaustion looked like, not just in the body, but in the eyes. And this man, despite all his polished wealth, carried that same tired shadow. He asked her about the diner, about why she worked nights. She shrugged. "It's quiet. People talk more when they're tired." He gave a short, surprised laugh. "People don't talk to me. You might be asking the wrong ones." He looked at her, then really looked tan for the first time. She felt seen instead of scanned. Outside, the storm hammered on. Inside, the space between them settled into something unplanned, uneasy, but honest. She refreshed his coffee. The cracked cup stayed between them, a silent symbol that even damaged things could hold warmth. That as the hours passed, the storm grew louder, but their conversation grew steadier. He admitted he hated the quiet of his own penthouse. She admitted the diner felt more like home than any apartment she'd lived in. Neither said it, but both knew they were speaking truths usually kept locked away. When the storm finally softened, Richard stood. "Thank you," he said, simple, but spoken with a gravity that felt unfamiliar even to him. He reached for his coat. The cuff of his sleeve caught on the counter, and in the motion he didn't notice the small object that fell, spinning once before landing near the foot of his chair. An engraved cufflink, silver, elegant, marked with his initials, R.H. Lina found it after he left, the bell on the door still trembling from his exit. She turned the cufflink over in her hand, feeling the weight of a night that wasn't supposed to happen and the faint, undeniable pull toward what it might mean. She didn't know it yet, but he had left behind more than metal. He had left behind the first thread of a story neither of them could avoid. The silver cufflink gleamed on the counter like a dropped secret waiting to burn whoever picked it up. Lina held it between her fingers early the next morning. The diner still quiet. The engraved letters R.H. caught the light in sharp strokes. She didn't need to guess whose it was. The man from the storm had left a piece of himself behind, and the weight of it felt larger than its size. By the time the breakfast rush began, the staff had noticed. "Fancy," one cook muttered, leaning in. "Looks expensive." A server whispered. "He left that on purpose, you think?" Lina ignored the murmurs, but the noise pressed around her like a fog. She wasn't used to attention, especially the kind that curled with suspicion. She wrapped the cufflink in a napkin and slipped it into her apron pocket, wondering whether returning it would be simple or complicated. She got her answer that afternoon. The diner bell chimed, and Richard Hale stepped inside. No storm this time, only the sharp presence of a man who usually entered rooms prepared. Yet here he looked cautious, scanning faces before his eyes met hers. "I believe I lost something," he said quietly. She nodded. "I found it," but before she could hand it over, the room shifted. 3 people in tailored suits entered behind him, his executives. Their polished shoes, tablet cases, and stiff eyes stood out in the humble diner like shards of glass on soft ground. The tallest executive, a senior VP with a tight jaw, watched Lina as if assessing a threat. His tone was dry, controlled. "Mr. Hale, we should handle this quickly. We have a schedule." Richard ignored him, focusing on Lina. "Thank you for keeping it safe." She offered the cufflink. His fingers brushed the napkin, careful and respectful. But the VP's stare didn't move. It pinned her like a critic examining a stain. "So," the VP said, voice smooth but sharp, "this is the waitress from last night. The one involved in our optics concern." The word hit Lina like a cold slap. Optics. Not behavior, not character, just appearance, just image. Richard's eyes tightened. That's enough. But the VP continued, speaking as though she wasn't right there. We need to be mindful. Interactions outside proper settings can create the wrong impression for everyone. Lene stood straighter, drawing on old lessons. She remembered being a little girl. Her mother's voice steady as she fixed Lene's braids in a cracked mirror. Hold your head up. They'll try to decide your worth before you speak. Don't let them finish the sentence. Her chin lifted now, slow and deliberate. If you're worried, she said softly, don't be. All I did was return something that wasn't mine. The VP blinked, surprised by her calm. But Richard looked almost grateful. He stepped closer, blocking the VP's line of sight. Lena did nothing wrong. The situation you're imagining doesn't exist. The VP's lips thinned. Sir, my concern is the company's stability. Richard's voice hardened. Your concern should be respect. The room held its breath. When they left, the cufflink gone but its echo still heavy, Lena exhaled slowly. The napkin she'd wrapped it in remained on the counter, soft and empty at the moment, felt anything but. The cufflink was no longer just an object. It was a reminder. Unseen power could judge her, but unseen dignity could protect her just as fiercely. The glass walls rose above the city like a giant eye, watching everything and forgiving nothing. Lena stood on the sidewalk staring up at Hale Industries headquarters, clutching the message she'd received that morning. Please come in. Mr. Hale would like to thank you properly. The words looked polite, but something inside her warned that this visit was not about gratitude. Inside, the lobby shone with polished floors and cold lighting. Every surface reflected her back at her, small, out of place, standing in a space designed to remind visitors who held power. The glass walls created the feeling that someone, somewhere, was always watching. As Lena walked toward the reception desk, employees looked up from their screens. Their eyes slid over her clothes, her posture, her skin. Some tried to hide their judgment. Others didn't bother. Whispered comments followed her like shadows. A receptionist forced a tight smile. Name Lena Brooks. I was told to come. Yes, he's expecting you, the receptionist said. But her tone made expecting sound like a mistake. Lena was led through a maze of hallways. Everywhere she walked, she saw contrast, elegant offices with wide windows, but the expressions behind them seemed strained. Luxury covering pressure, glamour hiding rot. When they finally reached Richard, he stood from a sleek conference table. Lena, thank you for coming. I just thought, well, after everything at the diner, I wanted to make sure you felt respected. He sounded genuine, but in this bright, cold tower, even sincerity felt rehearsed. I'm fine, she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. As they walked through the corridor, Richard tried to bridge the awkward space between them. I'm sorry for how my team acted, he said. They overreacted. She raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call it? He winced. They're under pressure. Investors, deadlines, none of it excuses how they spoke to you. She appreciated his effort, but it felt delicate, fragile, like he was afraid to push too hard against his own walls. They rounded a corner and stumbled upon a tense scene. A junior employee standing before two managers, hands shaking as she held a printed report. I'm telling you, the young woman said, voice trembling. He made a derogatory remark about my accent. I filed the complaint because it wasn't right. One manager sighed. We understand, but this isn't something we want to escalate. Just be careful about making things seem bigger than they are. The employee's face fell. So nothing will happen. We'll handle it, the manager said without meeting her eyes. For now, let's keep this internal. The young woman stepped back, shoulders folding inward. When she turned and walked past Lena, their eyes met. In that brief second, Lena saw a familiar pain being dismissed before the truth even had room to breathe. Richard's jaw tightened. He looked at the managers, then at Lena, unsure which step was the right one. She spoke first. Is that normal here? He hesitated. It shouldn't be. Before Richard could say more, a voice cut through the hallway. Mr. Helway, a woman in a tailored suit, the board liaison, approached with clipped footsteps. Her smile held no warmth. We need to speak with Ms. Brooks. Lena blinked me. Yes, the board would like a private conversation. It concerns last night's interaction. The way she said interaction made it sound like a crime. Richard stepped forward. I don't think that's necessary. The liaison didn't even look at him. It wasn't a request. Lena felt the same cold pressure she'd seen crush the junior employee moments earlier. But this time, the weight was directed at her. The liaison gestured toward a heavy wooden door at the end of the hall. Ms. Brooks, she said, if you'll follow me. And as the door swung open, Lena realized the glass tower didn't just expose people, it judged them. She stepped inside, knowing whatever waited in that room would change everything. The door shut behind Lena with a soft click, the kind that sounded gentle but felt like a lock. The conference room was colder than the rest of the building, its long tables stretching out like a judge's bench. 3 board members sat at one end, hands folded neatly, expressions smooth and unreadable. Not one stood to greet her. She sensed the pressure, instantly silent, heavy, deliberate. This was not a conversation. It was an evaluation. Ms. Brooks, the chairwoman began, voice polished like metal. Thank you for coming. We understand you had an unexpected interaction with our CEO. Lena nodded carefully. He left something behind. I returned it. Another board member leaned in. Yes, but such interactions can be complicated. We need to make sure no misunderstanding harms the company's reputation. The word reputation floated between them like a threat dressed as concern. They didn't say she was a problem. They didn't have to. Every sentence circled the same idea. She was a risk. A variable they did not control. The chairwoman slid a slim envelope toward her. We'd like to offer a small settlement for your time and discretion. Nothing about last night leaves this building. Lena stared at the envelope, thin, insulting, a price tag for her silence, as if her voice was something cheap enough to fold and hide. I didn't ask for anything, she said. We understand, the board member replied, his smile tight. But people talk, stories twist. It's safer for everyone if this matter ends quietly. Before Lena could speak, the door flew open. Richard Hale strode in, breath tight, eyes sharp with disbelief. What are you doing? The board shifted but did not rise. Addressing a potential issue, the chairwoman said calmly. Richard's anger flashed across his face. By interrogating her, by offering payouts, it's a standard precaution, the man said. We're protecting the company. Richard shook his head. You're protecting yourselves. The room tensed. Executives exchanged glances, the kind that held unspoken power struggles. Lena stood at the center of it, feeling the machinery of the corporation grinding beneath their polished words. Richard turned to her. His voice softened. You don't owe them anything. You did nothing wrong. One board member raised a brow. With respect, Mr. Halley, you may not see the full picture. The public does not respond well to rumors of impropriety involving someone of Ms. Brooks' background. Lena's stomach tightened. Her background. The sanitized way of saying she didn't fit their world. Richard's jaw clenched. That's enough. But the board wasn't finished. If she refuses the offer, the chairwoman said, we cannot predict how outside parties may interpret the situation. The warning was clear. Take the settlement, or face their version of the story. Lena felt every set of eyes on her. The envelope lay between them like a trap. Fear pressed against her ribs, but something steadier pushed back her mother's old lesson. Hold your head up. Don't let them decide your worth. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. I'm not signing anything today. I need time to think. The room went silent. Her words were small but firm enough to shift the air, enough to mark the start of something larger. And as Richard stepped beside her, the board's expressions tightened, sensing the refusal that would change everything. The rooftop air felt thin, as if the wind knew it was carrying truths people tried to avoid. Lena stood near the edge of the diner's roof, arms folded against the evening chill. From up here, the city looked quieter than it ever felt, streets like dark rivers, windows blinking like tired eyes. She had come here to breathe, to rebuild the pieces of herself that the boardroom had tried to shrink. What she didn't expect was the sound of footsteps climbing the metal stairs behind her. Richard Hale emerged into the fading light, shoulders heavy, tie loosened, the calm mask he wore in public slipping. The rooftop stripped away status. Up here, he wasn't a billionaire CEO. He was a man who had run out of excuses. I figured you might come here, he said softly. Lena didn't turn. You shouldn't be here. Someone might think it's about optics. The word landed between them like a bruise neither could ignore. Richard stepped closer, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm sorry for all of it. The board, the settlement, the way they talked to you. I should have stopped it sooner. Lena closed her eyes. The wind brushed past her. Cool and honest, something human spaces often fail to be. Richard leaned his hands on the low wall, looking out at the same city she saw. You know, everyone thinks my success came from being bold, but most of it was the opposite. He gave a humorless laugh. I built my career by not making enemies, staying quiet, avoiding conflict so deals wouldn't fall apart. The confession surprised her. You avoiding conflict? He nodded. Whenever something wrong happened in a meeting, I let someone else speak up. I told myself it was strategy, but really, it was fear. His voice steadied, but the shame beneath it was clear. And yesterday in that room, I did it again. I watched them talk about you like you were a problem to solve instead of a person they harmed. Lena finally looked at him. The rooftop light caught his face, not powerful, not polished, but stripped of pretense. Why didn't you defend me? She asked. The question wasn't sharp. It trembled with hurt, the kind people hid for years. Richard swallowed hard. Because I've spent too long believing the company's comfort mattered more than the truth. He exhaled. But when I saw you standing there, when I realized they were using you to protect themselves, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Lena searched his expression for honesty and she found it raw and unguarded. The wind pushed gently at her hair. Thin air, thin excuses. Up here, everything showed. I should have spoken up the moment they questioned your worth, Richard said. You deserved better. I failed you. His voice cracked on the last word, not with weakness but with understanding of what silence had cost her, and what it had revealed about him. Lena stepped back from the edge. I'm not asking you to fix everything, she said. Just don't let your fear be louder than what's right. Richard nodded slowly, like someone accepting a responsibility he had avoided for years. I won't. Not again. They stood side by side, quiet, the rooftop air sweeping around them, thin, honest, with nowhere left to hide. And for the first time, Richard Hale felt the weight of truth, not as a threat, but as a call he could no longer ignore. The memo hit the internet like a spark landing on dry leaves, small at first, then suddenly unstoppable. Lina saw it on her phone during a short break at the diner. A customer had left the screen open on a news site. The headline, bold and merciless: leaked Hale Industries memo calls local waitress a risk to company image. Her breath caught. She clicked the article. The memo wasn't vague. It named her. It labeled her as unstable, attention-seeking, potentially damaging to partnerships. The exact words the board had used in the room of quiet threats, now exposed for the world to judge. Within hours, the story spread. Comment sections filled with arguments. People debated her value, her motives, her character without knowing a single thing about her. Meanwhile, at the top floors of Hale Industries, the executives scrambled. It's contained. One VP insisted, "We just need to redirect the narrative." But the narrative was already out of their hands. Richard Hale stood in his office, the leaked memo glowing from his tablet. Every sentence made his stomach tighten, not because it threatened the company, but because it revealed the truth he had ignored for too long. His executives gathered around, speaking over one another. "We need to distance ourselves from the girl. She's becoming a liability, Richard. The board expects a statement supporting our internal process." Their words piled like sandbags around him, each meant to protect the corporation, not the truth, but beneath their voices. Richard remembered the rooftop thin air, thin excuses, and Lina asking, "Why didn't you defend me sooner?" He looked at his reflection in the glass wall. Wealth, power, and behind it all, a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict at the cost of justice. "No," he said finally, "we're not burying her to save ourselves." The room froze. AVP stepped forward. "With respect, this is not the time for moral stands. The company's stability is at risk." Richard shook his head. "The company's stability has been contaminated by the way we treat people. That's the real problem." The board liaison narrowed her eyes. "Then what do you propose, Mr. Hale?" He straightened his shoulders. "We bring everything into the open. A public town hall today." Gasps erupted around him. "That's reckless. You'll ignite a firestorm. You'll destroy investor confidence." Richard didn't back down. "Or we show accountability before the fire spreads." Less than 2 hours later, the company announced a live-streamed town hall meeting. Employees whispered. News outlets swarmed the entrance. Social media lit up with speculation. Lina watched from the diner's back doorway as the announcement played on a small mounted TV. Her name was everywhere now, and she felt exposed, trembling between fear and relief. At least the truth had a chance to breathe. The last line of Richard's statement echoed through the screen. "No one should be silenced to protect power. We will address this openly." By sunset, crowds gathered outside Hale Industries, employees, reporters, and citizens waiting for answers. Inside, the board members huddled together, preparing retaliation, their whispers sharp with strategy and fear. And at the center of the storm, Richard Hale stepped toward the microphone, knowing this moment would either redeem him or break everything he had built. The first sound was silence, heavy, expectant, like the moment before a verdict is read. Rows of employees, reporters, and community members filled the auditorium. Cameras blinked red in every corner. The stage lights cast a hard glow across the podium, making it impossible for anyone to hide. Richard Hale stepped forward. His suit was sharp, but his expression was stripped bare. No boardroom mask, no polished distance, just a man standing in front of the damage he had allowed. He gripped the podium as the murmurs settled. The room smelled faintly of warm cables and nervous sweat, small details made large by tension. "I called this meeting," he began, "because silence has protected the wrong people for too long." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Executives shifted in their seats. Richard continued, voice steady but weighted. "The leaked memo showed the world something I should have addressed long ago, that parts of this company's culture have been contaminated by bias, fear, and the need to control a narrative instead of confronting the truth." Behind him, the board members exchanged stiff glances. This was not the speech they had rehearsed with him. Richard's eyes scanned the crowd. A waitress returned a cufflink I carelessly dropped. She treated me with more dignity in that small act than some of my own leaders showed her afterward. Lina, seated near the front, felt heat rise in her chest at the acknowledgement. Not embarrassment, validation. Richard paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Lene Brooks did nothing wrong, but my company did, and I did, too." Gasps, a few shocked whispers. Cameras zoomed in. A board member stood abruptly. "Richard, this is not the place." "It's exactly the place," he said, not turning. "Because everyone deserves to hear the truth in the same room where the lies were built." The auditorium hushed again. Richard looked directly at Lene. "I would like her to speak." Lene froze. Her heart pounded like fists on a locked door. Public speaking was nothing like confronting a single executive, but the truth inside her had been waiting for a space like this. She walked to the stage. Each step felt like stepping out of the shadows cast over her name. Richard stepped aside. The microphone was taller than she expected. She adjusted it with a hand that trembled only once. When that memo hit the internet, she began, voice quiet but controlled. I saw people arguing about me, who I was, what I wanted, what I meant to this company, and not one of those people knew me. The room leaned in. I'm not a risk. I'm not a story to clean up. Her eyes swept the chairs. Even the board seemed to shrink under her gaze. I'm someone who works hard, someone who shows respect, someone with dreams. But because of my background, some people decided I didn't belong anywhere near your world. A beat of deep, uncomfortable silence. But the truth is, talent doesn't come from background. Fairness shouldn't depend on position. Her voice tightened with emotion she refused to hide. And respect shouldn't be something that gets negotiated behind closed doors. People who had entered the room ready to judge her now watched with quiet awe. This isn't just about me, she said. It's about every person who has been ignored because someone in power decided their voice didn't matter. A rustling swept the audience. Approval. Recognition. The first shift in power. Richard stepped back to the microphone. This company will change, he said, and that starts today. On the far side of the stage, the board members retreated into hushed discussion, their confidence shaken, their certainty cracked. For the first time, they were the ones on unsteady ground. And everyone watching could feel it the moment the balance of power began to shift. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a space that once shut people out. Tant now stood waiting, wide and unguarded. 2 days had passed since the town hall reckoning, but the building still buzzed with its echo. News outlets replayed clips of Laina's speech. Employees spoke in hushed voices about shifting tides. And for the first time in its polished history, Hale Industries felt less like a fortress and more like a place trying to breathe. Richard Hale walked through the lobby with new clarity. Every step felt deliberate, grounded, earned. At his side, his assistant handed him a folder filled with urgent updates. The deal partners from Eastbridge Investments have requested a renegotiation, she explained. They want full transparency this time. No hidden conditions. Richard nodded. Good. That's how it should have been from the start. In the past, such demands would have irritated him. Too slow, too messy, too exposed. But now, openness felt like the only honest foundation left. The town hall had cracked the old shell, and now the rebuilding began. They reached the executive floor. The tension of old power still lingered here. Stiff postures, lowered voices, people glancing over shoulders. Change may have begun, but change always stirred. Fear. Waiting in his office was the VP responsible for the derogatory remark that had sparked the first crack. Richard, the VP said with a smooth confidence that had protected him for years, I assume we're discussing damage control. I have a strategy. We're not discussing strategy. Richard cut in, voice firm. We're ending a pattern. The VP blinked, meaning. Richard placed a termination letter on the desk. Your actions weren't a mistake. They reflected a culture you helped build. And that culture ends today. The VP's composure faltered. You're firing me. For one comment, for many, Richard replied. This company will not move forward with leaders who use people as shields. Security escorted the VP out. As the door shut, a quiet shift settled over the room and, old pillar removed, a new space opened. Richard exhaled. It was only one step, but it mattered. Later that afternoon he met Laina in the lobby. She stood near the elevator, scanning the towering glass walls with a cautious curiosity. You sure you want me here? She asked. Yes, Richard said without hesitation. Not because of publicity, not to fix a headline, because you see things we've ignored for too long. She studied him, searching for honesty. So, what is it you want from me? He handed her a formal letter, a role as a consultant. Help us build cultural transparency into every corner of this company. Help us make sure what happened to you and to others never happens again. She looked at the offer, then at the elevator as its doors slid open again with that gentle chime. The open doors mirrored the moment. No gatekeeping, no silent barriers, no locked rooms filled with threats. This isn't a token role, Richard added. Your voice changed this place. Now I'm asking you to help guide it. Laina stepped toward the elevator, her reflection catching in the glass, small but steady. Someone who had walked through storms and boardrooms and still stood tall. As the elevator doors waited, open and patient, she nodded. If it means giving dignity back to people who never had it, then yes, I'll help. And for the first time, the glass tower wasn't a symbol of exclusion. It was a door she had opened, not just for herself, but for everyone who would come after her. The first sign of change wasn't an announcement or a headline. It was the scratch of Laina's pen on an ordinary notepad. She carried it through every hallway of Hale Industries, its worn cardboard cover tucked under her arm. No gold logo, no corporate polish, just a plain notepad filled with observations she refused to soften. At first, employees stiffened when she entered a room. Conversations paused. Smiles looked forced. Some wondered if she was a spy for the CEO. Others thought she was a temporary symbol who would disappear when the buzz died down. She ignored all of it. Instead, she listened. She sat with interns who feared speaking up. She watched team meetings where good ideas were drowned out by louder voices. She visited departments no executive had set foot in 4 years, her notepad filled with clear-eyed, honesty notes about blind spots, patterns of bias, moments of disrespect, quiet acts of goodness that deserved to be seen. Every page captured truth without decoration. Slowly, the building began to shift, but change was never smooth. One afternoon, a senior manager cornered her in the hallway. "Look," he said, tight-lipped, "some of us have been here for decades. We don't need someone from outside telling us how to behave." Lina didn't argue. She simply opened her notepad and read a line aloud, his own assistant's feedback, written anonymously. It described being ignored in meetings, talked over, dismissed. The manager's face changed, not in anger, but in recognition. She said that, "Yes," Lina replied, and she wasn't the only one. He didn't say another word, but days later, she saw him giving his assistant space to speak. That was the pattern: discomfort, then reflection, then small but meaningful adjustments. Not a miracle, not overnight, just steady work. Meanwhile, Richard carried his own weight. Guilt pressed on him, quiet but constant. He met with teams, listened more than he spoke, admitted when he didn't know enough. People were startled by his humility at first. One employee whispered, "Is he really changing, or is this another PR move?" Richard overheard, and instead of walking away, he asked to hear their concerns directly. He took notes. He apologized. He acted. Change became louder because it was repeated, not because it was flashy. One evening, long after most staff had gone home, Lina sat alone in a small conference room reviewing her notes. Policies needed rewriting. Training programs needed rebuilding. Some issues were so deep they felt like knots tied years ago. The door opened softly. Richard stepped in, tired but steady. "You're still here. So are you," she said, glancing up. He smiled, small, real. "I wanted to thank you. Things are different because of you." She tapped the notepad. "Things are different because people are trying." He walked closer, stopping where the light fell halfway across his face. There was something unspoken in the air, gentle, subtle, waiting. "I should have fought for you sooner," he said quietly. "But I'm fighting now, not just for you, for everyone." Lina held his gaze. "Then keep going." Their hands didn't touch. Their words stayed simple, but the silence between them softened, filling with a warmth neither dared name yet. As Richard left the room, Lina flipped her notepad closed. It looked plain and small, but it was reshaping a company from the inside out. Change didn't need noise. Sometimes it just needed truth, written one line at a time, and a feeling quietly growing between two people brave enough to face it. The ceramic cup sat inside a small gift box, its gold-lined cracks glowing softly, proof that something broken could be repaired into something stronger. 1 year had passed since the night that changed everything. Hale Industries no longer felt like a glass tower meant to intimidate. The walls were still transparent, but now they symbolized openness instead of surveillance. Teams met across departments that had once avoided each other. Junior employees spoke in meetings without fear of being silenced. A new cultural transparency office stood near the entrance, its door always open. At the center of it all was Lina Brooks. Her notepad, once plain and doubted, had become the backbone of the company's renewal plan. Policies shaped by real voices, decisions tested by lived experience, conversations guided by honesty instead of hierarchy. Today, though, she stood far from the corporate world, inside a community center auditorium filled with students, local workers, and neighborhood families. A banner above the stage read, "Truth and Accountability, Forum Building Better Futures." Lina was the keynote speaker. She adjusted the microphone, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of the community center, dust and old paint. "Not impressive, but comforting, real, you know," she began, steady and calm. "People think change happens when someone important gives a speech, but that's not how it works." The room quieted. Change starts when one person decides to tell the truth, even if that voice shakes, even if the world tries to make them smaller. She spoke about the diner, about the boardroom threats, about the leaked memo that turned her into a target overnight. But she didn't speak with bitterness. She spoke with clarity. "What happened to me wasn't new. It happens every day, in big ways and quiet ways. But accountability means choosing not to look away." Some listeners nodded, others wiped their eyes. "And healing," she continued, "means fixing what was broken without hiding the cracks." Her words landed gently, like seeds dropped into open soil. Near the back of the room, Richard Hale listened quietly. No spotlight, no announcements. He had slipped into a folding chair wearing a simple jacket, blending into the crowd. He had come for presence, not praise. He watched Lina with a kind of stillness that came from deep respect. She didn't need him to speak. She had found her own voice, and he was learning to let her lead. After the forum ended, people gathered around Lina with questions and gratitude. When the room finally thinned, she stepped toward the exit and found Richard waiting near the door, holding the small gift box. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said. "You were remarkable." She smiled. "You didn't need to interrupt. You were here. That matters." He handed her the box with both hands, as if offering something fragile. "I had something repaired. Thought you should have it." She opened the lid. Inside lay the cracked ceramic cup she'd once handed him during the storm, a cup that had witnessed the very beginning of everything. But now, the fracture lines were filled with gold-like seams, each one catching the light. Kintsugi, Richard said quietly. A way of fixing broken things by honoring the cracks, not hiding them. Lina touched one of the bright seams. The warmth in her chest surprised her. Not romantic heat, not corporate gratitude, but something deeper, recognition. Thank you, she whispered, not for the gift, for understanding the journey. As they walked out into the evening, the cup safe in her hands, Lina looked up at the sky streaked with fading orange and thought, sometimes change doesn't begin with a speech or a policy. Sometimes it begins with one night in a quiet diner, one cracked cup, one brave voice refusing to be erased, and sometimes that's enough to reshape a world.